everybody, and welcome back to Sorry I Missed This. It's me, your host, Kate Osborne, and today we are talking to Michelle Frank, author of A Radical Guide for Women with ADHD. She's a clinical psychologist, and she specializes in helping women with ADHD achieve today's topic, emotional intimacy. What does it mean to be intimate with someone? What does it mean to be emotionally intimate with someone? And is emotional intimacy and physical intimacy different? The answer, of course, is yes, that emotional intimacy and physical intimacy are, in fact, two different things, both things that we talk about here on Sorry I Missed This. But something that I see over and over and over in the work that I do is that oftentimes that they're conflated. And this can cause a lot of issues in relationships, especially. We see this a lot with men and women, where men view sexual intimacy as a way of creating emotional intimacy, and women see emotional intimacy as a way of accessing sexual intimacy. So you can see how the two things might be sort of diametrically opposed foes. And so one of the things that I really wanted to talk about this week with our wonderful guest, Michelle Frank, is how do we, as women with ADHD, develop emotional intimacy outside of physical intimacy? A lot of us struggle to get into the right headspace to be physically intimate. A lot of us have that sort of internal monologue where we're talking about the stresses and the stuff going on outside of the bedroom. And so how do we, as people outside of our sex life, how do we create a sense of intimacy in our lives? How do we create a sense of safety and connection, especially in consideration with the challenges that often come with living with ADHD? This is such a great episode, and I'm so excited to welcome you all to my conversation with Michelle Frank. Let's get at it. Hey, Michelle, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm super excited to talk to you today. But before we do, I kind of want to talk a little bit about how incredibly qualified and amazing you are and all of the cool things that you do. You are a clinical psychologist. You're the author of A Radical Guide for Women with ADHD. You wrote The Radical Guide. Would you say, Michelle Frank, that it is in fact radical, or is it more like tubular?
It's a tubular. Nice. I like it. Yeah, right. Like more tubular. Yeah.
Let's start at like the core of the thing, the 101. What is emotional intimacy?
Oh gosh. I think there's probably 1,000,001 definitions of it. But for me, when I'm thinking about it for myself, for my clients in general, I think emotional intimacy is an ability to be with one's own emotions and the emotions of another person, and to experience a connectedness and an emotional presence. Mm-hmm. It's an ability to share and show ourselves to another person and let them in a way that like also has some boundaries. Because I think the irony is like, if we have maybe no boundaries around connection and closeness and vulnerability, then we also end up with barriers to it. So I don't mean it's without that, but I think it comes down to like presence and vulnerability and authenticity.
And also, just for the record, the purpose of this podcast, when we're talking about emotional intimacy, we're talking about deep friendships. We're talking about connections with others. We're not necessarily talking just about romantic relationships, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think that's why we kind of landed on the term emotional intimacy, because a lot of the content out there tries to narrow it down. How to do ADHD at work, how to do ADHD in, monogamous long-term partnership. And so I like the conversation around just like emotional intimacy, because that expands the paradigm of what we mean by relationship.
It is wild to me, as somebody who lives with ADHD, that we would ever sort of put ADHD in its own box away from emotional intimacy. Because I know for me, I've been hyper aware of all of the ways that I struggle in relationships since I was a kid, I remember it being really difficult for me to make friends in school and like relate to people and that kind of thing, because I was like the weird little gremlin in the back of class. And so it's like, it's so interesting to me. And honestly, it's a big reason that I got into the work that I do, is because we did keep doing that ADHD at work, ADHD at home, but there was never this like ADHD in relationships.
Yeah.
And thusly this podcast now exists. But
right.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think we're so quick to sort of put ADHD in that box?
Oh, we just love things in boxes, don't we? Like as a society, it's just, we like to reduce and simplify. And I think in general, we've had a hard time holding the depth and complexity of ADHD. There's been so much minimization around ADHD. I do this for a living, right? I speak, I advocate, do all these things. And I'm sick of feeling like I need to defend ADHD as a real phenomenon. Like, I just want to hand people a stack of fMRI studies and say, here, like,
Oh my God.
and so I think that comes into play too,
Yeah. I haven't made like decent ADHD content in months because it's still like, there's a guy in the comments telling me that I'm like a shill for big pharma every time. And I'm like, and it just, and it's like, well, maybe if you're going to try harder,
Yeah.
and it's just like, are you joking? Like it is the year of our Lord 2024.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I'm so sick of having to start at the very beginning anytime I want to have any conversation. And it's really hard to do that in a 60-second video. End of my rant. I apologize. It just touched something in my soul.
So pull it back to emotional intimacy. That is exactly one of the huge barriers we face, is all of that emotional labor to be seen and understood. So I can share with someone a little bit about my challenges, but if I bring up the word ADHD, I can run into any host of like misinformed opinions or judgments. And some people might be really cool about it, but it's hard to take those risks to share some of these vulnerable sides of ourselves when, like you said, you can just go on social media and have someone completely deny your lived experience.
Yeah.
And so then you enter into a new friendship perhaps, and maybe you want to talk about something about this part of your life. But again, to do all of that emotional labor, to navigate all of those triggers, and to have the like regulation and strength within you to stay calm and just respond, it takes so much. And so there you go. There's one barrier to intimacy for people with ADHD is I have to prove that my lived experience is real. That is exhausting for anybody. And certainly marginalized communities know this in many, many different ways, right? So if you're ADHD and you're also queer, trans, or Black person, or brown person, or indigenous, I mean, double it down times 1 million on this, like my lived experience. Like I need to prove to you that what I've lived is real. And it just becomes exhausting. And so I think people, regardless of identity, just start saying, that's just a part of me I can't talk about then, is it?
One of the most common questions that I get all the time is about disclosure. It's like, should I tell my partner that I have ADHD? Should I tell my boss? Should I tell whoever?
Yep.
And for a really long time, I was like, why is this a question? Like, I don't understand. Like, and then I realized it's because every time you disclose to somebody who you haven't disclosed before, there's that immediate risk of, and maybe my boss doesn't believe that ADHD actually exists, or maybe my partner was told his whole life that ADHD is just being lazy and you need to try harder. The emotional labor that you're doing of, God, I hope this person isn't about to be an asshole to my face about my own lived experience.
Exactly. And I think internally there's a brake system that goes on. Like, how much of myself can I show and share without encountering judgment, criticism, shame, dismissal, invalidation, the well-intentioned annoying fix of, have you tried exercising, taking omega-3s, and using a planner? Like all of these things.
Oh, I cackled.
Yeah. A big piece of it is that ADHD folks tend to have more experiences of relational rupture. So this is the teacher saying, you're not living up to your potential. This is the parent or like just adult figure in your life with all of the, no, stop that, pay more attention, just try harder. You forgot your things again. You need to stop doing like all of that, just constant stuff. And then sometimes it's even stronger, right? All the way to like leaving all the covers open and your partner getting annoyed with you. Like there's just more opportunities for having this moment of possible conflict. It's not always conflict, but sometimes. And it just builds up and it builds up. And that's where then we really get into that rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And we really get into the guardedness and the masking, right? Like masking takes a toll.
So when we're talking about those like shame narratives where we're telling ourselves that we're bad, we're not good, we're ashamed, we're embarrassed, whatever. One, why do you think we do that as women with ADHD? And then two, what do we do about it, Michelle?
Women with ADHD are like notorious internalizers. Everything goes in, right? Mm-hmm. And again, it's what did we encounter growing up? And it's important to have some place, whether it's, with a trusted friend or journaling or with a therapist, to really dissect and reflect on what did I learn about having differences, having challenges, having needs, because that's going to be hugely informative of your internal self-talk and responses to moments that are frustrating. Do you let it just be frustrating, or does it become a full shame spiral and you go down the slide of I'm terrible and suck at life and I can't?
What I have really started noticing is how like just razor thin that line is. Like this morning was an amazing example. Last night I was like in my zone and I was like writing and I was like working on stuff and I was like, yeah, I was super hyper focused on it. And then I went to bed and this morning I woke up and I was like, oh no, I didn't reset the living room for setting up the podcast. And so I immediately just snap into that, like, you're a fuck up. Like you messed up everything. Like, why can't you ever get your,
Why can't
and I was
you
like,
ever?
and why don't you ever plan ahead? And I was like, okay, except that like, we're fine. Like we're doing it. We're doing the thing. Like, yeah, it's a little inconvenient, but it was just immediate and I had to stop. And even after all of this time, even after all of this work, it's just that immediate slip into it. And then I have to go, no.
Yeah.
But that's still the time of no. Like it takes a minute.
It does. To pause, I think shame is so tricky. I think there's a few things that can happen there. One is like, whose voice is this? Where does this come from? Like, that's a big exploration, deep dive we all need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because we each have a different brand of that. Of that drills. It's like a drill sergeant, or it's a like angry authority figure, or it's usually it takes on different forms for different people, but we've all got it. And ADHD are so notorious for kind of like almost relying on that voice to like keep things in check sometimes. And there's a big fear, huge fear of getting distance from, or letting go of, or soothing the critic. There's this like, oh no, that's going to mean full, like I'm just going to give up then. Right. And so I think there's something there around like, how do we interact with that side of ourselves, that voice? Like what does that need from us to really, is it just like, whoa, we got this. I hear you. You're concerned about the setup for the podcast. Thank you. I'm here and we got this, kind of just like an acknowledgement of even that it's there. But ultimately, I think the shame and emotional intimacy piece is really bi-directional, and that shame doesn't exist well, like when we're here and we're sharing it together and we're in connection talking about it with compassion and humor. It doesn't really have the staying power when you tell the story here, right?
Yeah.
And so it doesn't survive within compassionate connection. And in order to feel that like courage to share it, we need some experiences under our belt of like people are safe to share this with. And so it's like kind of a bit of a cycle. Yeah. But like when we're able to move through shame or just share it, it's not even that you have to get rid of your shame in order to be in connection. Mm-hmm. Like I don't want to give that impression either. You need to be perfectly regulated at all times in order to pass go. Like, no. We're humans with sensitive nervous systems, all of us, whether we like to acknowledge that or not. It's true for every human being. And so we're not always going to nail it. Can we still show up and be in a relationship and share it? Is the question. Like, what tips someone over into taking that micro risk?
So if we're dealing with all of this, if we are struggling and we're, and we're being kind to ourselves and we're coaching, we're doing all of this different stuff. What does that look like externally? Like the impact in our relationships with, partners, friends, colleagues, that kind of thing.
I think any kind of softening towards ourselves strengthens us in connection with others. When we develop that sort of inner strength of like, I can be here for myself, we're more willing to take some risks. We're more willing to be a little bit open, because it's kind of like, yeah, I'm going to risk asking that new person if they want to hang out sometimes on whatever level, romantic or friend or whatever, colleague, out for coffee. You know why? Because like, if I do run into judgment and criticism, I know I got me. It might hurt, and I know I can be there for myself and I can regroup. And I think part of it is developing that kind of practice. And I mean practice, of attuning to our own self, both our emotional needs and our ADHD, like brain-based needs, like knowing that builds some trust. And when we have that trust, I think we're more able to take some risks. And when we're able to work with our shame, we're usually able to show up more regulated,
Yeah.
So then if someone does say, hey, I want you to know something, you did hurt my feelings, or, hey, there was this ADHD thing and you were late and it was frustrating or disappointing for me. We don't go to defensiveness. We go to, oh my goodness, tell me more.
Yeah.
Let me do that differently. Like, let's talk that through. But if we exist within shame, we can't be vulnerable enough to hold another person's hard parts either.
It sounds like shame almost becomes a defense mechanism that we can use rather like, oh my God, I'm such a crappy friend. Instead of just saying, yeah, sometimes I'm a crappy friend, but I can strive to do better. It becomes like that defense mechanism that actually puts us farther away from the people that we're trying to connect and lean into and grow towards.
Absolutely. Shame will have us isolate and I mean, that's literally like the emotional energy of shame is like a hiding away. And it's even when our body language, when we're experiencing shame, like just look at a kid experiencing shame and imagine what they might do, there's a hiding around it. And it's very painful for us.
I've just become hyper aware of my posture. I was like,
yeah.
So in conversation with this idea of practice, I'm interested in what sort of like practical steps, tips, or tricks you might have that can sort of take us out of that shame-focused mindset into more of we're building emotional intimacy, we're accepting ourselves as we are, we're moving forward with the idea of connection and growth rather than that hiding away and that shame.
So layered. And I wish there were just easy tricks. And my answer is one that frankly, even just like drives myself crazy, and I'm probably going to piss off the listener a little bit, which is like, ooh, gotta be with the feelings,
Man,
yeah, I know.
Man.
I know. Isn't it just too bad? I know. It's just too bad sometimes, says the therapist. In my own personal life, I'm like, oh, I gotta feel that, huh? Yeah, it's hard. So that we don't double down on this meta emotion of shaming the shame, Like it's bad that I feel shame. When I think about your question, I think about like kind of coming out of the shadows a little bit, right? And I think that involves taking some micro risks, right? And it involves putting yourself out there so that you can have new experiences, right? To like add to your repertoire, to your library of things that you experience relationally and emotionally, and hopefully add ones that are helpful. So when we kind of hide away, we diminish our opportunities to actually like experience something new. And I'm not saying that we should just stop masking all the time. Masking keeps us safe in some situations. And there are ways in which I think we all know, like, maybe I could have been a little more authentic in that interaction or with that person. Like, maybe think about the people in your life you would like to get a little closer to. And what are the signs that they offer that they might be a good person to try that with?
After you so rudely told us that we have to feel our feelings, how absolutely dare. The sort of flag that immediately went up in my head is sitting in uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah.
For a lot of women with ADHD, those uncomfortable feelings are based in that rejection sensitivity, or that, fear of being vulnerable. So what does that look like, parsing through rejection sensitivity in order to be able to reach out and say, hey, guess what? I might get rejected, or there might be like an element of rejection there, or probably, honestly, if we're being honest, there won't be. But spoiler, surprise. But how do we sit in that and not get lost in the sauce?
I think it's everything we're talking about. We know that ADHD brains do emotions differently in a lot of ways.
Can you just like brief overview of that?
Yeah, so ADHD brains are just more sensitive emotionally. So like if you look back on the history of your life, if you're someone with ADHD, you'll probably say, yep, been sensitive. So we're a little more prone to amygdala overload, like just like the real emotional part of the brain getting overwhelmed or hyper aroused. We tend to struggle to filter out stimuli in general. Shocker, I know, like news alert, right? We struggle to filter out stimuli, and that involves emotional stimuli. So we take in a lot, right? It's just like I struggle to tune out the tag on my shirt, or, the people walking down the street. I struggle to I take in a lot of emotional stimuli. So, and then on top of that, we tend to have a pretty strong negativity bias.
Yeah.
Our brains really hook and get a bit stuck. And then we, of course, have like the confounding issues around anxiety and, like intrusive, like ruminative thoughts, and struggles around like low mood or self-concept. And you can get all chicken and the egg up in there, right? But like at the same time, I think ADHD life is inherently stressful. So we could also just add that contextually. There's more to worry about sometimes. Let's just be honest.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I yelled. I got excited.
No, you're right. Like, there's
a little more to coordinate sometimes.
A little more. And it's a little harder to do it. And I might forget the thing. I've forgotten the thing. I might forget it again. And so I might, be a little more vigilant towards forgetting. So there's a lot of elements to it. So knowing that, okay, I know I have big emotions, like I have big feels, I think just makes it easier to say, okay, well, then what do I need around that? We each need to kind of discover our own brand of like, how do we get in there and feel our feels in a way that works for us and aligns. So part of it is emotional regulation, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the rest of it, the rejection sensitivity piece, man, yeah, I had this just image cross of like an email from a boss or something, like that ADHD moment of, oh no. And then of course you open the email and they're like, great job, and you're like, I thought I was going to get fired. So, that kind of thing happening all the time. It's sort of like, okay, well, then we have some patterning. And if we can just slow down, which I know is not always the strong suit, but if we can practice the slowing down long enough to say, I know what's happening here and it's okay.
Yeah.
Then we've got a better shot. For most people I work with, I think just understanding and having language around RSD goes a long way too.
Okay, so we're talking about RSD. We're talking about building emotional intimacy. Something that we haven't touched on, which I know a lot of women with ADHD tend to live with, is that sort of people-pleasing perfectionist side of themselves. And I loved what you said. You said like getting comfortable with your own brand. Like it took me so long to love my brand. It took me a really long time to be like, oh, my brand is what my brand is, but that's just who I am. And, I'm not going to change it. And it turned out that my life is way better once I started embracing it. But for a really long time, I was really embarrassed about my brand. For a really long time, I was, trying to be a very different version of Kate because I thought that's what the people around me wanted. So how do we, knowing this, we have this component piece of RSD, we have this emotional dysregulation component. We also can tend to be people pleasers and perfectionists and this kind of thing. So how do we, as women with ADHD, build authentic connections?
So again, I think we're back to this idea of what if I just tried it?
Yeah.
Part of it though is sourcing like the types of people we want in our lives, and like trying to find people can be really hard as an adult. And so finding people who get it, can be really important. And sometimes that looks like maybe an ADHD group, or having like other friends who are neurodivergent in some way or the other, and trying to find those people that understand this particular part of your life. That being said, I don't think everybody needs to. I think you find people who in some way demonstrate that they're worth taking that risk on, but without making them do gymnastics either.
Yeah. So let's say that we are a woman with ADHD. We're in a relationship with a partner who sees us, who supports us, who is doing their best, but we're still feeling that missing emotional intimacy. We're still feeling like, I'm not quite connecting in the way that I need or I want. Do you have any advice for those people who are maybe in a really solid relationship, but they've just never learned those emotional intimacy skills?
Yeah, I love that quote. It's a Rumi quote and says, I'm going to butcher it, of course. And it says something along the lines of like, do not search for love, but search for all the barriers within you to love. Like, I think then you got to go on a dive and ask yourself, one, what does it mean to me? What would it look like to have that quality of connection that I long for? Sometimes that can be hard, actually. I mean, it sounds like a simple one-off question, but actually sit and think about that for a while. Like,
that's a big question.
It's a big question. So maybe defining a little bit more of what, like, how would you know if you had that quality? Like, what would that feel like? What would that look like? And make it more tangible. But then the second piece there is really saying, how have I not been fully open to intimacy?
Yeah.
How have I myself been a bit unavailable or a bit guarded? And then begin to call yourself out on it a little bit,
Yeah. It's that self-awareness component.
Yeah. When my partner shares something with me, how do I respond? How do I respond to my partner's differences and challenges?
Yeah.
Do I pull that critical voice like with myself? Do I, does it get projected? Like,
I've been so guilty of that as a partner. And I was like, oh, I really don't like that about myself. Like that voice is for me, not for them.
Because it's hard to accept in like our closest attachment figures what we can't accept in ourselves. Right. Have a kid and find out about that one, So, there's that. I think too, like this idea of emotional intimacy, I was thinking about what does that require? It requires emotional regulation.
Yep.
So that you can be grounded enough to show up with presence. That is what creates vulnerability. And I think it's okay to start at small places by saying things like, hey, this feels weird and vulnerable to share. And you might not think so at all, but here I go.
Yeah, just naming it.
Yeah. Like, can you name the clunkiness with someone? Because then to me, you're in it. The second you can name clunkiness with someone, that you're there.
Oh, I love that. And then you have a secret code because you can just be like, hey, this feels a little clunky, but
can I tell you a clunky?
Yeah. Hit me with them clunks, dog.
Yeah. Where are we going? I don't know. So, exactly. And so now we're in it. And now, like, there it is. And there it is. And there's the authenticity, right? Where we can, like, be weird and quirky together. We can have this moment and we can, like, say feelings are awkward. And then there you go. There's your intimacy. Like, it doesn't have to look like a 3-hour, deeply intense conversation about our feelings. I think, right?
I'm fine.
Like,
intimacy can look different in different relationships based on your own specific needs. There can be a 5-minute conversation. It doesn't have to be an hour-long conversation every time. Oh my God.
Like, I think that's the other thing is maybe sometimes we think that emotional intimacy needs to be like these sit downs, these intense emotional discussions, but intimacy can be experiencing something together, having a shared experience, looking out at the majestic mountains together, like you and I on this hike, taking in this scene in this moment together.
Yeah.
We just shared that. That's actually quite intimate, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that whatever we talked about or didn't talk about on the hike up and back. So it doesn't have to be that it's like full of this deep emotional processing or disclosure. Like, it's also, I mean, some of that you got to have, especially in a romantic relationship. You got to process, hey, how are we doing? You got it at some point. But it's okay also, what we know about, like, to add a tangent on romantic relationships, what we know is, like, people have different styles around, like, emotional closeness and, like, conflict, comfort with conflict versus conflict avoidant. It doesn't matter so much what the style is. It matters that it matches and it works for that couple and that they repair conflict and rupture.
Yeah.
So, like, you might have two people who really love to get deep and have deep philosophical or emotional discussions. Cool. But you might have two people who just want to, like, do some crafts together and be able to be silent. Like, that might, like, if I can be quiet with you, that's where I feel, right? Like, the most intimacy. And I think that's okay.
I cannot tell you how funny that is, specifically because
Crafts.
every service you cannot see behind the camera is just covered in craft supplies, because that's what me and my partner do. We just sit around and make crafts together.
See?
So we're like, yeah, we're just going to sit and vibe and talk when we feel like talking. It's so great. I love it.
So maybe part of what we're coming to here, Kate, is like this idea that you get to define what intimacy means for you. We started out trying to define it for the listener, and maybe we stumbled our way into something even cooler, which is this idea that you get to define it for yourself.
Emotional intimacy comes from the place that we define, and we get to like invite people into that space.
Yeah.
And that feels special and sacred a little bit.
It does. And there isn't one, again, back to the beginning, box that you need to fit into to capture that.
Yeah.
It does take some reflection and some like deep dives into vulnerability. Yeah. Like, how did I come to understand myself and the ways I understand myself, treat myself the way I treat myself, engage in relationships the way I do. But then from there, well, what do I want now? And I think it's okay to keep figuring that out as you go. Like maybe the other takeaway we want to have is like, I don't think there's some perfect endpoint you get to.
The work in progress.
I still am.
Yeah. I sure am.
So it's more about creating the spaces where people can share in all of these experiences and having that anchor into the ADHD-ness specifically, I think feels so freeing and lovely.
Michelle Frank, thank you so much for being here. You are a psychologist. You are a speaker. You are an author. You are a content creator. Tell the people where they can find you and the incredible work that you're doing.
You know what? I just want to say I'm just going to play that for myself every morning to counteract any future shame spirals the day brings.
I got that. Okay, do you want a better one? Michelle Frank, you are talented and amazing and cool. You are powerful. You are wise.
Yes.
You are helpful.
Yes.
You are strong.
Yes.
Tell the people where to find you, strong Michelle Frank.
Yes. I have an Instagram I have not contributed to in a little bit because I have a toddler, but you could look up ADHD Doc on Instagram. You can also just find me at enrichcenter.org. That's the name of the small group practice I work for in the Denver metro area. I also tend to just pop into different podcasts and conferences. So feel free to just come say hello anytime. You can also shoot me an email if you have any burning questions, Dr. Frank at enrichcenter.org.
And we will also link your book, A Radical Guide for Women with ADHD, in the show notes. So you can check it out because if we are talking about vulnerability and here's a clunker. I got a clunker for you, Michelle Frank.
Oh yeah.
I was so scared to have you on the show because your book was one of the first ones that I read after I got an ADHD diagnosis. And I was like, oh man, she's so smart and cool. I'm going to blow it. So thank you for being such a wonderful guest and for writing such an incredible book and being a part of so many women's journeys. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And a clunker for me is every time I do a show like this, I'm like, oh no, what if I blow it? No. So there you go. We didn't blow it together.
I can tell you quantifiably, you did not, in fact, blow it. You, in fact, crushed it. So, crushed. So good. Thank you for listening. Anything mentioned in the episode will be linked in the show notes with more resources. Have a question, comment, burning story you'd like to share? Email me at sorryimissedthis@understood.org. This show is brought to you by understood.org. Understood is a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering people with learning and thinking differences like ADHD and dyslexia. Learn more at understood.org. I'm your host, Kate Osborne. Thank you so much for listening. Remember to be kind to yourself, remember to be kind to others, and I'll see you again soon.